The second fleet arrived without warning. 24 human warships dropping out of faster-than-light transit in perfect formation behind the craft position. Commander Yoon felt a surge of relief as she recognized the flagship of Admiral Choi Min-seok, a veteran of conflicts that had helped shape human military doctrine, Indomitable. "This is the Resolute." The Admiral's voice crackled over the communication channel. "Sorry we are late, but it seems you have been busy. Better late than never." "Admiral," Yoon replied, "the craft have 8 ships remaining, and their ground forces are fully committed to a siege on the surface." "Then let us finish this." The combined human fleet moved as one. 36 warships against 8 damaged craft vessels that had already lost the will to fight. Some craft captains attempted to flee, pushing their engines to maximum power in desperate bids to reach the system's edge and escape into faster-than-light transit. Human ships ran them down with relentless efficiency, one by one. The slavers fell or surrendered, their crews choosing captivity over destruction as they finally understood that they could not win this fight. Only Desak refused to yield his flagship. The Dominance limped toward the human command vessel with all remaining weapons blazing. Its hull breached in a dozen places, and its crew dying around him. "All ships, concentrate fire on the dreadnought," Commander Yoon ordered. "He is attempting a ramming approach." "Commander," her communications officer interrupted. "Warlord Desak is hailing us." Yoon opened the channel one final time. Desak appeared on the view screen, his face bloodied from shrapnel wounds, his 4 eyes burning with hatred that went beyond mere anger into something almost religious. "You think you have won," he snarled, "but you have only made enemies of an empire that spans dozens of worlds. And we will never forget this humiliation." Yoon regarded him with something close to pity. "There will be no vengeance," she said quietly, "because your empire built itself on the suffering of those who could not fight back. And that foundation will crumble now that the galaxy has seen what happens when someone stands against you. I would rather die than submit to prey. That is your choice to make." The Dominance continued its suicidal charge. Growing closer with each passing second, Yoon gave the order without hesitation. 36 ships fired as one, and the craft dreadnought vanished in a ball of nuclear fire that briefly outshone the system's sun warlord. Desak died as he had lived, refusing to accept that he had never truly been the predator he believed himself to be on the surface. The siege broke within hours of the fleet battle's conclusion. Craft ground forces, learning that their ships had been destroyed and their warlord killed, attempted to surrender en masse. Some human soldiers, their blood hot from the long night of fighting and their hearts heavy with memories of fallen comrades, wanted to refuse those surrenders. Sergeant Major Bay stopped them with a single command. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We are not like them, and we did not come here to take lives, but to save them." He looked at the craft soldiers laying down their weapons, seeing not enemies but broken beings who had never been taught that there was any other way to exist. "They will face justice for what they have done," Bay continued. "But that justice will be fair, and that justice will be given by courts, not by us in the heat of battle." The surrender was accepted. Over the following days, human medical ships descended to Valora Prime, their crews working around the clock to save Valorian lives and treat the wounded of all species. Corporal Shin Yuna found herself assigned to refugee coordination, helping Valorians locate family members who had been separated during the chaos. The little child who had trusted her during the battle refused to leave her side, its glow warm and golden whenever she was near. "What will happen to us now?" Elder Lumavith asked as he watched human engineers begin the work of clearing rubble and restoring basic infrastructure. Commander Yoon had come down from orbit to oversee the final stages of the operation, and she answered the question herself. "We will help you rebuild," she said simply, "and we will make sure no one threatens your world again." Why? Lumavith pressed, genuine confusion in his voice. We have nothing to offer you. No alliances, no resources. No strategic value whatsoever. Yoon smiled, and for a moment, the hardened warrior looked almost gentle. Because you asked for help, she said. And that was enough. The official casualty reports came in over the following weeks. 312 human soldiers had died in the campaign. Their names added to memorials on Earth, and aboard every ship in the fleet, over 4,000 Valorians had survived because of their sacrifice. The Krath Dominion, stripped of its largest fleet and its most feared commander, began to fracture as conquered worlds sensed weakness and rose in rebellion within a year. The empire that had terrorized a sector of the galaxy for generations would cease to exist 6 months after the battle. The Galactic Assembly convened to vote on human membership. Species still feared the Deathworlders from the third planet of Sol, worried about what creatures of such violence might do if they decided to turn their attention toward conquest rather than protection. The debate raged for hours until the Valorian ambassador rose to speak. Lumav had traveled to the assembly station personally, his elderly form glowing with colors that translated to profound emotion. When the craft came to our world, he began. We sent a message into the void, not knowing if anyone would hear, not knowing if anyone would care. He paused, letting his words settle over the assembly. The humans heard. And they cared, and they came without hesitation, fought without mercy, and showed us compassion without limit. His glow shifted to that warm golden color that Shin had first seen in the eyes of children. If that is what Deathworlders are, Lumavith said, then we should be grateful they exist. And we should welcome them as partners rather than fear them as threats. The vote passed by a comfortable margin. Humanity joined the galactic community not as conquerors, but as protectors. Their reputation forever changed by a single act of selfless courage. Commander Yoon attended the ceremony via holographic link, standing beside Ambassador Quan as the official documents were signed. Do you think we made the right choice? Quan asked quietly. Going to war for people we had never met? Yoon thought of the soldiers who had died, the families who would mourn, the cost that could never truly be measured. Then she thought of glowing children trusting a human stranger, of an elder finding hope in the darkness, of a species that would survive because someone had answered their call. Yes, she said. I think we did, somewhere in the vast emptiness between stars. Another distress signal began its long journey toward Eartha, colony under attack, a ship in distress. A people crying out for help they did not expect to receive. The signal would reach human space within the week, and when it did, the Deathworlders would answer again. Because that was who they were, and who they would always be. Not monsters, but guardians. Not predators, but protectors. Not conquerors, but the ones who came when all hope seemed lost. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers. But it was also a little safer now that humanity had claimed its place among the stars. And that was worth every drop of blood that had been spilled to achieve it. Warlord Desek stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship and stared at the tactical display with 4 eyes that could not believe. What they were seeing, he had lost. 9 ships in the space battle and thousands of soldiers on the ground. And the humans showed no signs of slowing down for the first time in his long and brutal career. Desek felt the cold grip of fear around his heart. Get me a communication link to the Galactic Assembly, he ordered, his voice harsh with barely contained panic. Priority channel. Emergency diplomatic frequency. His communications officer scrambled to obey, and within moments, Desek found himself addressing a hastily assembled council of species, representatives who looked confused and annoyed at being summoned so urgently. Honored representatives, Desek began, forcing his voice into something resembling calm. I am contacting you to report a grave violation of galactic law by the human species. The Kovani ambassador, a being of crystalline structure that chimed when it spoke, leaned forward with interest. What violation do you speak of, Warlord? The humans have attacked a sovereign Krath operation without provocation or authorization, and they are committing what can only be described as war crimes against my forces. He played recordings from the battle, carefully edited to show only human aggression without context, making it appear as though unprovoked monsters had descended upon peaceful Krath vessels going about lawful business. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably. The humans were a young species, barely a century into their galactic presence, but they had already developed a reputation that made older civilizations nervous if they could destroy the Krath so easily. What was to stop them from turning that power against others? Perhaps intervention is warranted, the Metheny delegate suggested, its gas-based form rippling with concern. The humans must be taught that they cannot simply attack whoever they wish. But before a vote could be called, Ambassador Kwang Taeyan appeared on another channel, his face tired but determined. Honored representatives, before you make any decisions, I would ask that you consider some additional context for this situation. Desik's lips curled back from his teeth. The human has no standing in this matter. On the contrary, Quan replied, I have every standing, as do the Valorians whose dying screams reached my homeworld across 17 light years of void. He played his own recordings, the distress call that had started everything. Desperate and terrified voices begging for help that might never come. Footage from the ground, showing Krath soldiers dragging glowing Valorians from their homes, separating families, executing those who resisted. Images of orbital bombardment, reducing beautiful cities to ash and rubble while millions died. The Krath Dominion came to this system to harvest a civilian population, Quan said, his voice cold with controlled anger. They came to enslave an entire species and sell their biological compounds on the black market. And when the Valorians sent a distress call, my people were the only ones who answered. He looked directly at the assembly, meeting the eyes of every representative who would look back. I have one question for this council, he said. Would you have answered? Would any of you have risked war to save a species that was not your ally, that had never done anything for you, that had no strategic value whatsoever? Silence filled the chamber. We did, Quan continued. We heard a cry for help and we came because that is who we are. And if that makes us criminals in your eyes, then so be it. But we will not apologize for saving lives. The vote was called, and by the narrowest of margins. The assembly chose not to intervene. They would not help the humans, but they would not condemn them either. Thasic's gambit had failed on the surface of Valora Prime. The situation grew desperate. Ekreth reinforcements arrived from orbit. 10,000 fresh soldiers dropped in massive transports. Their orders simple and brutal: destroy the humans and reclaim the harvest. Sergeant Major Bay watched the enemy forces massing on the horizon and felt a grim satisfaction settle over him. They are throwing everything they have at us, he told his officers, which means we have them scared. We have 300 soldiers against 10,000, one lieutenant pointed out. Those are not good odds, Sergeant Major. They are not meant to be good odds, Bay replied. They are meant to be our odds, and we will make them work. The siege began as the sun set on the shattered Kapatak Wrath forces surrounded the human defensive perimeter, cutting off all routes of escape, and began a relentless assault that would last through the entire night cycle. Humans fought in rotating shifts, each soldier giving everything they had before falling back to rest, while others took their place. They shared ammunition. When supplies ran low, they dragged their wounded to safety under heavy fire. Refusing to leave anyone behind, they held positions that should have fallen hours earlier through sheer stubborn determination. Commander Yoon watched from orbit, her fleet still engaged with the remaining Krath ships, unable to provide ground support without risking the very people they had come to save. How long can they hold? She asked her tactical officer, unknown, commander. But Sergeant Major Bay has never failed a mission in his entire career. Yoon nodded. Though worry gnawed at her heart on the ground, Bay moved from position to position, encouraging his soldiers, adjusting defensive lines, making every bullet and every soldier count by midnight. He had lost 40 soldiers. The Krath had lost over 2,000. Still they came, driven by Vreth's increasingly desperate orders to break through at any cost. They do not fight like soldiers, one of Bay's sergeants reported, her voice strained with exhaustion. They fight like they have never faced death before and do not know what to do about it. That is because they have not, Bay replied. They have spent generations hunting prey that could not fight back. And now they are discovering what happens when the prey has teeth. Dawn came slowly, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of red and orange. The human line still held barely. Bay looked at his remaining soldiers, exhausted and wounded and running low on everything except determination, and felt a fierce pride burning in his chest. We are still here, he told them over the open channel. And as long as we are still here, those people behind us are safe. In his damaged flagship, Warlord Desek watched the battle reports with growing horror. These creatures did not surrender. They did not retreat. They did not stop even when wounded, even when surrounded, even when facing impossible odds. They kept fighting with a ferocity that defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. What are they? He whispered to himself. His first officer answered, though the question had not truly been meant for him. They are Deathworlders, my lord. And I am beginning to understand what that truly means. Desek turned to face his subordinate, explain. A Deathworld is not merely a planet of death, the officer said slowly, as if working through the concept himself. It is a planet that creates beings who have conquered death, who have faced extinction every day of their existence and survived through sheer refusal to die. He gestured at the tactical display showing the impossible human resistance. They cannot be broken because they have already survived the unsurvivable. And they cannot be intimidated because nothing we do to them is worse than what their own world did for millions of years. Desek felt cold certainty settling over him like a funeral shroud. He had made a terrible mistake, and now his entire fleet would pay the price. The gravity of Valora Prime was barely 2/3 of what humans experienced on Earth. And Sergeant Major Bay Juno felt like he could fly. He bounded across the rubble of what had once been a grand plaza, covering distances that would have been impossible on his homeworld, his powered armor making him faster and stronger than any creature the Krath had ever encountered around him. 300 human soldiers spread out through the ruins of the capital city, their weapons sweeping the darkness for threats while their sensors searched for survivors. Contact. Corporal Shin Yuna reported over the tactical channel. I have life signs in the collapsed structure at Grid 7, approximately 50 individuals. And they are not moving. Could be injured or hiding, Bay replied. Take your squad and investigate. But be gentle, because these people have been through enough already. Shin led her team through a gap in the rubble, their helmet lights cutting through the dust and smoke that filled the air. What they found made even these hardened soldiers pause. Valorians huddled in the darkness, perhaps 60 of them, their bioluminescent skin flickering with terror as they stared at the armored figures that had suddenly appeared in their hiding place. They were beautiful and fragile, their large eyes reflecting the light, their bodies thin and delicate in ways that spoke of a world without predators or violence, and they were absolutely terrified of their rescuers. Easy, Shin said softly, removing her helmet so they could see her face. We are not here to hurt you, and we received your distress call, and we came to help. An elderly Valorian moved forward. his glow shifting from fearful purple to cautious blue. "You are humans," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We have heard of your kind, and the stories say you are monsters from a world of death." Shin knelt down to bring herself to his eye level, ignoring the way her knees protested against the hard rubble. "The stories are true," she admitted. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. And we survived because we learned to fight back against anything that threatened us." She reached out slowly, giving the elder time to pull away, and gently took his hand in her armored fingers. "But we also learned something else on our world of death," she continued. "We learned to protect the people who could not protect themselves, because that is what makes us human." The elder's glow shifted to something warmer. "Something like hope. I am Lumaveth," he said, "and I lead what remains of the Eastern District Council, though I fear there is little left to lead." "How many survivors are there?" "In this shelter, 63, but there are other groups scattered throughout the ruins. Perhaps 300 in total if the Krath have not found them yet." Shin relayed the information to Sergeant Major Bay, who immediately began coordinating search and rescue operations. But before they could locate all the survivor groups, the Krath found them first. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Krath soldiers pouring through the ruins, with weapons blazing and war cries echoing off the shattered buildings. They expected the humans to scatter and flee like every other species they had. Conquered, they were catastrophically wrong. Bay's voice thundered over the tactical channel, calm and commanding despite the chaos. All units formed defensive positions around civilian concentrations. And remember that these creatures have never fought anything that could hurt them back. So let us educate them. The battle that followed would become legend among both species. Though for very different reasons, the Krath had numbers on their side. Nearly 2,000 soldiers against 300 humans. And they expected an easy victory. What they found instead was a nightmare made flesh. Human soldiers did not break when their comrades fell. They did not retreat when wounded. They did not show fear even when surrounded. And outnumbered, a Krath squad leader watched in horror as a human soldier took 3 shots to the chest and kept fighting. His armor cracked and his blood staining the rubble beneath him, yet still returning fire with deadly accuracy until reinforcements arrived. "They do not die," the squad leader screamed over his communicator. "We hit them and they just keep coming." Sub-Commander Vreth listened to the increasingly panicked reports from his ground forces and felt something he had never experienced before in his long career of conquest. "Concentrate fire on their wounded," he ordered. "Force them to choose between fighting and saving their fallen." It was a tactic that had worked against dozens of other species, exploiting their compassion as a weakness against humans. It was a fatal miscalculation when the Krath focused on wounded soldiers. Their squad mates did not flee or surrender. They counterattacked with double fury, closing the distance to fight hand-to-hand if necessary. And humans in close combat were something out of the Krath's worst nightmares, creatures of bone and muscle, built by a world of crushing gravity and relentless predators, using fists and blades and improvised weapons with the skill of a species that had been killing for sport since before they learned to speak. Corporal Shin found herself guarding a group of Valorian children while the battle raged. Around them, the little ones glowed with soft, terrified light. Their bodies pressed against the rubble as the sounds of combat echoed through the ruins. One child, no bigger than a human toddler, crawled to Shin's side and looked up at her with enormous eyes. "Are you going to die?" the child asked, its glow pulsing with fear. Shin checked her weapon and smiled down at the little one. "Not today," she said. "And neither are you, because I made a promise to keep you safe, and humans take their promises very seriously." A Krath soldier burst through a gap in the rubble, weapon raised, and Shin shot him twice in the chest before he could fire. The child flinched at the sound but did not cry out instead. Something strange happened. The child's glow shifted from fear purple to something Shin had never seen before. A warm golden color that spread to the other children and then to the adult Valorians nearby. What does that mean? She asked Elder Lumavith, who had stayed with his people despite the danger. The old Valorian watched her with wonder in his eyes. It means they trust you, he said softly. And that is not a gift my people give lightly. The battle raged for hours, the Krath throwing wave after wave against the human defensive positions. And each wave broke against the stubborn determination of soldiers who refused to give ground by dawn. Sub-Commander Vreth had lost nearly half his forces. The humans had lost perhaps 50. Sergeant Major Bay stood at the center of the defensive perimeter. His armor scorched and dented, his body aching from a dozen minor wounds. But his spirit unbroken. No one else dies today, he told Elder Lumavith. Not on my watch. Above them, the sky still burned with the fires of war. But for the first time since the Krath had arrived, the Valorians allowed themselves to hope. The monsters from the Deathworld had come to save them, and against all odds, it seemed like they might actually succeed. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light transit at the edge of the Valorian system, and Commander Yoon felt her stomach tighten at the sight that greeted them. 17 Krath warships hung in orbit above Valora Prime, their dark hulls bristling with weapons platforms, and their cargo bays no doubt filled with stolen people. The planet below was burning. Great columns of smoke rose from where cities had once stood, visible even from orbit, and the night side of the world flickered with the orange glow of uncontrolled fires spreading across forests and farmlands. Tactical assessment, Yoon ordered, her voice steady despite the horror she felt. Her tactical officer studied his screens with grim efficiency. 17 confirmed hostile vessels. Commander, ranging from destroyer class to what appears to be a command dreadnought. And I am detecting multiple ground force deployments across the primary continent. Survivors? Scattered life signs in the ruins of major population centers. But the Krath appear to be conducting systematic sweeps, and the numbers are dropping by the hour. Yoon gripped the arms of her command chair until her knuckles turned white. Every hour they delayed meant more. Valorians dragged away in chains. More families torn apart. More lives destroyed by creatures who saw them as nothing more than resources to be harvested. Open a channel to the Krath. Flagship, she commanded. The main view screen flickered and then displayed a face that would haunt the nightmares of lesser species warlord. Thesek was massive, even by Krath standards. His bone-plated face scarred by decades of conquest. His 4 eyes gleaming with cruel intelligence as he studied the human vessels that had appeared in his domain. What is this? He asked, his translator rendering his words in a deep rumbling tone. Small creatures from a distant world coming to witness our harvest? I am Commander Yoon Sichin of Earth's Unified Space Command, Yu replied, rising from her chair to face him directly. You are conducting illegal operations against a civilian population, and we are here to end them. Thesek's lipless mouth twisted into something that might have been amusement. Illegal according to whom? The Galactic Assembly has no jurisdiction over Krath operations. And your pitiful world has no treaties with these glowing weaklings. We do not need treaties to do what is right. The warlord leaned forward, his 4 eyes narrowing with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. I have heard stories about your species. Little human, tales of a death world that produces creatures of unusual resilience. But I have conquered 12 worlds, and I have never found an enemy I could not break. Yoon met his gaze without flinching. We received a distress call, she said, her voice cold and clear. Release the Valorians and withdraw your forces from this system, or we will take them back by force. For a long moment, Desek simply stared at her. And then he began to laugh. It was an ugly sound, harsh and grating, filled with the absolute certainty of a predator who had never encountered anything capable of threatening him. You have 12 ships, human, and I have 17. And my crews have been fighting since before your species learned to walk upright on your poisonous little world. He gestured dismissively. Leave now and I will let you live as a courtesy to fellow hunters. But if you choose to fight, then I will add your skulls to my collection. Commander Yoon smiled. And something in that expression made Thesic's laughter falter. You have never fought humans before, she said quietly. Allow me to correct that oversight. She cut the communication channel and turned to her weapons officer. All ships, weapons free, and target their engines first, because I do not want any of them escaping to report our tactics. The battle began with a barrage that lit up the darkness of space like a new sun being born. Human ships launched volleys of missiles, tipped with nuclear warheads, kinetic accelerators hurling tungsten rods at velocities that turned them into civilization-ending weapons, directed energy beams that cut through void with deadly precision. The Krath returned fire, their weapons designed for bombarding planets and intimidating lesser species. But they quickly discovered a terrible truth: human weapons were not designed for conquest. Human weapons were designed for war against other humans, perfected through millennia of conflict against the most dangerous prey in the galaxy. And they were absolutely devastating against enemies who had never faced true opposition. The first Krath destroyer exploded within 30 seconds of the engagement, its hull pierced by a dozen kinetic rounds that ignited its reactor core. 2 more followed moments later, caught in a crossfire from human ships that moved with impossible coordination. They are faster than their mass should allow, a Krath officer shouted on the command frequency. And their weapons are penetrating our shields like they are not even there. Thesic watched in disbelief as his numerical advantage evaporated. The humans fought like no species he had ever encountered, pressing forward when they should have been retreating, absorbing damage that would have crippled other fleets, refusing to break or scatter even when individual ships took critical hits. What are they? He whispered, genuine fear creeping into his voice for the first time in decades on the Indomitable. Commander Yoon directed the battle with cold precision. A part of her grieved for every human sailor who died, every ship that fell to Krath weapons. But she could not afford to let that grief slow her down, not when innocent lives hung in the balance. Focus fire on the dreadnought, she ordered. Cripple their command and control. 5 human ships concentrated their fire on Thesic's flagship, hammering its shields with relentless fury until breaches began appearing in its hull. The warlord ordered a retreat. His remaining ships, now numbering only 12, fell back to the far side of the planet's moon, using its mass as cover while they regrouped and tried to understand what had just happened. They had lost 5 vessels in an engagement that lasted less than 10 minutes. The humans had lost 1. And even that crippled ship was still firing as it drifted away from the battle. Deploy ground forces immediately, Yoon commanded. We need to establish a perimeter around the survivor concentrations before the Krath can reinforce their planetary positions. Sergeant Major Bae Junho led the first wave of dropships down through the burning atmosphere. He was a veteran of campaigns on 3 different worlds, a soldier who had fought pirates and insurgents and creatures that would have driven lesser beings mad with terror, but even he felt his heart race as he looked at the devastation below. Listen up, he told his soldiers over the tactical channel. There are thousands of civilians down there waiting for someone to save them, and we are going to be that someone no matter what it costs. The dropships punched through clouds of smoke and ash, their hulls scorched by the heat of a dying world below them. Krath ground forces numbered in the tens of thousands, spreading across the ruins of what had once been a beautiful civilization bay. checked his weapons one final time, and grinned. "They have no idea what is coming," he said to his squad. "And by the time they figure it out, it will be far too late." The dropships touched down in the heart of the devastation, and humans poured out into the alien night with weapons ready and fury in their hearts. The real battle was just beginning. The signal came from the edge of known space. A cry wrapped in static and desperation that traveled across 17 light years before reaching the listening posts orbiting. Neptune Lieutenant Park Mireille was the first to hear it. She sat alone in the monitoring station, surrounded by screens that flickered with data from 1,000 different sources. When her console began flashing red, and a sound unlike anything she had ever heard filled her headphones, it was not human. The voice was high and musical, trembling with fear, speaking in a language that the universal translator struggled to process before finally rendering the words into something she could understand. "Please help us," the voice said. "They are taking our children and our elders and everyone they can find, and we cannot stop them. And we have no weapons, and we have nowhere to run, and please, if anyone can hear this, we are dying." Mireille's hand shook as she recorded the message and began tracing its origin. The signal came from the Valorian system, home to a species known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful nature and their remarkable healing abilities. The Valorians had never harmed anyone in their entire recorded history. They glowed with soft, bioluminescent light that changed color with their emotions. And they had spent centuries developing medical technologies that saved countless lives. Across dozens of worlds, now someone was hunting. Themere sent the recording to Earth's unified space command headquarters in Seoul, and within the hour, Commander Yoon Sojin was reviewing the intelligence with growing fury in her dark eyes. "The Krath Dominion," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They have been avoiding human space for decades because they know what we are capable of. But they thought the Valorians would be easy prey." The intelligence reports painted a horrific picture. The Krath were a slaver empire that had conquered 17 worlds and harvested their populations. For labor and biological resources, they were tall and armored with natural bone plating, their faces dominated by 4 eyes that saw in multiple spectrums. And they had never lost a war because they chose their targets carefully. They attacked only the weak and the peaceful. They avoided anyone who might fight back. Ambassador Quan Taeun joined the Emergency Council meeting via holographic link from his posting at the Galactic Assembly Station. "The Assembly is advising against intervention," he said, his expression troubled. "The Valorians are not allied with Earth, and the Krath Dominion is considered too dangerous to provoke unnecessarily." Commander Yoon stared at him for a long moment. "How many Valorians have already died?" she asked. Quan hesitated before answering. "Early estimates suggest at least 50,000 casualties in the first wave of attacks, with 3 major cities destroyed by orbital bombardment. And if we do nothing, the Krath will harvest the entire planet within 6 standard months, Commander. And the Valorian species will effectively cease to exist as a free people." The council chamber fell silent. Yoon looked around at the faces of her fellow officers. Seeing the same conflict in each of them, intervening meant war with a powerful empire. It meant risking human lives for a species that had never done anything for Earth. It meant defying the Galactic Assembly's recommendation and potentially making enemies of species who feared human aggression. But doing nothing meant something far worse. Doing nothing meant becoming the kind of people who heard a cry for help and turned away. "I want the first response fleet ready to deploy within 12 hours. Yoon said finally, "Full combat configuration with extended supplies for a prolonged engagement." One of the admirals leaned forward with concern on his weathered face. "Commander, if I may ask, what is our justification for this action?" "The politicians will demand answers, and the Assembly will condemn us. Yoon stood and walked to the window that overlooked the sprawling cityscape of Seoul, where millions of people lived their lives in peace, because generations before them had fought and died for that peace. Our justification is simple, she said without turning around. They asked for help, and that is all we need to know, Ambassador. Kwan smiled slightly despite the gravity of the situation. I will inform the Assembly that Earth is responding to a humanitarian crisis and that we expect their support, or at least their silence. And if they choose to condemn us, then they will have to explain to the galaxy why they stood by while an entire species was enslaved and we did not. The first response fleet mobilized with a speed that would have seemed impossible to any other species in the Galaxy 12. Warships crewed by humans gathered in formation above Earth, their hulls bristling with weapons designed not for hunting weaker species but for fighting each other. Humanity had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war. They had fought across continents and oceans and eventually across the stars themselves, always against opponents who could match their ferocity and cunning. The Krath had conquered pacifists and herbivores and species that had never known violence. They had no idea what was coming for them, Commander. Yoon stood on the bridge of the flagship, indomitable as the fleet prepared for faster-than-light transit around her. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, their faces calm, despite the knowledge that many of them might not survive the coming battle. All ships report ready, Commander. Our first officer announced. Yoon nodded and opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Commander Yoon to all vessels, she said, her voice carrying across 12 ships and 4,000 sailors. We are about to engage an enemy that has built an empire on the suffering of others and that has never faced a species willing to fight back with everything they have. She paused, letting her words sink in. The galaxy calls us Deathworlders because we evolved on a planet of crushing gravity and extreme weather and predators that hunted us for millions of years before we learned to hunt them instead. And they use that term as a warning to others. Her eyes hardened with determination. Today, we will show them what it really means. The fleet entered faster-than-light transit, reality bending around them as they crossed light years in moments, hurtling toward a distant system where a peaceful species waited for salvation that might never come in her ready room. Yoon reviewed the intelligence files on the Krath Dominion one final time. Warlord Desek commanded the harvesting fleet, a veteran of 12 successful campaigns who had never faced defeat. His species considered themselves the ultimate predators, born to rule over lesser beings. They had never encountered humans in battle. Yoon studied the Krath anatomy and their tactical doctrines and their weapon systems, memorizing every detail that might give her an advantage. And when she was finished, she smiled grimly. The Krath had never lost a war because they only attacked those who could not fight back. Humans had never lost a war for a very different reason. They simply refused to stop fighting until victory was achieved. No matter the cost somewhere ahead, the Valorians were dying, but help was coming. The Deathworlders had answered the call, and they were bringing enough firepower to reshape the political landscape of an entire galactic sector. The Krath just did not know it yet.